Nigel Farage wants headlines, not power. And I think he's being very cunning in the way he's doing that, because to have a minor say in the political landscape is more powerful if you're going to needle all those who actually have to exercise judgment than to actually have to exercise judgment yourself. So I think he's very cunningly placing himself as an irritant to all the powers that be, but he will never want to be in power himself.
We're going to move on now and talk about Nigel Farage, who's had a great run since he announced he was standing at the general election. After all, his party, Reform UK, has gone up in the polls. The other leaders seem a bit flat-footed and uncertain about how to deal with his threat. But has he, or has he not, now made a political misstep? He says that Western leaders should hold peace talks with Russia to break the stalemate in Ukraine. That follows him repeating his view that the West provoked Russia into attacking Ukraine. Both the Conservatives and Labour have been united in criticising that. Dominic, what do you think is going on here? Again, these are not new views, but they have more of a platform, perhaps, just because of the proximity to the election, and also about what it means in this context, in an election context. Is this just electioneering? Is this what Nigel Farage thinks perhaps people voting for him want to hear, or is it something else?
Well, it's true, on the far right, there has always been, well, for many years, a great enthusiasm for Putin. And Nick Griffin, the leader of the BNP, went to Russia at the time of after the Crimean invasion, along with far-right leaders from Europe, essentially to issue a benediction to Putin. And Farage, I suspect, knows that. He's playing to that particular gallery very, very cleverly, while not endorsing it himself. I would want to make just a statement of fact, however, on the issue of NATO. I mean, NATO was last enlarged in 2004 when the former Soviet countries, went in. The boundary has not moved since then. The idea, and by the way, the Russians accepted it. They made no complaint about it. The idea that the expansion of NATO, which last occurred 20 years ago, is in any sense whatsoever a reason for the murderous invasion in 2022 is simply a lie. Right? It's just a lie.
So why does Nigel Farage talk about the expansion then of NATO?
You'll have to ask him. But it has not expanded since 2004. It was accepted. And the point about Ukraine, it's very, very different. Putin wrote an enormous 5,000-word essay the year before the invasion, basically saying Ukraine is not a real country. It is really part of Russia. It has nothing to do with NATO. It is essentially, you could say, imperialism, colonialism. Of course, I would make one point on a slightly personal level, because Putin says he's defending Russian speakers. We have, since the beginning of the war, shortly afterwards, been hosting a Ukrainian family in this country. They're still with us. They are Russian speaking, right?
Yeah.
They're not Ukrainian speaking. And the mother says to me, well, if Mr. Putin is trying to defend Russian speakers, why is he murdering us? Why is he killing us? We're Russian speakers. Her family are. So no, I think Farage's position is nauseating. But he's a very astute politician. I think a lot of people that he wants to attract will be attracted to this. So I don't see it, funnily enough, as a great blunder on his part.
That's interesting. Joan, the point here, I suppose, is that Nigel Farage wrote that article, and we would have noted it at the time. But it was I suppose it was different then, because he wasn't in the play, so to speak. He wasn't standing to be an MP. He wasn't the leader of the Reform UK party. So that's why I suppose it becomes more nauseating, more dangerous for people who are listening. Albeit at the same time, perhaps some people may agree with him, but I think it's just the kind of amassing of all these factors at the same time that makes this quite difficult to swallow, perhaps.
I think Nigel Farage wants headlines, not power. And I think he's being very cunning in the way he's doing that, because to have a minor say in the political landscape is more powerful if you're going to needle all those who actually have to exercise judgment than to actually have to exercise judgment yourself. So I think he's very cunningly placing himself as an irritant to all the powers that be, but he will never want to be in power himself.
And Joan, do you think that he's wrong when he says that Western leaders should hold peace talks with Russia to break the stalemate in Ukraine?
I'm not in a position to judge. I mean, we can all say, yes, everybody should have peace talks. We all believe in peace. Peace is a good thing, but it doesn't amount to anything. You have to know what's going on. You have to understand the diplomatic circles that are active at the time. So yes, of course, we can say, yes, there should be peace. Everybody get together. Let's have peace. It's easy. It doesn't amount to anything. Certainly not if you don't have the power to do anything about it.
Dominic, what do you think about this? This idea, it kind of makes me think. It makes me think a little bit about. I think it was Donald Trump, wasn't it, Dominic, who said, "Oh, I could solve a particular conflict in a day or something like that if I was president."
Yeah, I mean, there are two problems with Farage's idea. The first problem is that Ukraine doesn't want to hold peace talks, and the second problem is that Russia doesn't want to hold peace talks. Other than that, it's a brilliant idea.
I think that's very well put, Dominic.
Yeah. Someone here raised the point, hasn't Sweden and Finland joined NATO since 2004? But that's the point, isn't it? They joined after the invasion, so it was a consequence of the invasion, not a cause of the invasion, the last two since 2004. The Conservatives' gambling scandal isn't going away. I think it's fair to say that it's widening, the Gambling Commission is widening its inquiry into it as of today. So far, no party members have been suspended. That includes Craig Williams, former MP, and the candidate who admitted that he had a flutter and called the bet a huge error of judgment. You don't need an inquiry into him, do you? He's already admitted it. So why has he not been suspended? Dominic, that's the question, isn't there? That this scandal may not be the greatest thing in the world, but it speaks to issues of trust and honesty that have dogged the Conservatives since Partygate. And it speaks to questions of leadership of Rishi Sunak. How's he going to deal with it? How important do you rank this as a scandal, and what do you think happens next?
Well, I think it is important because unlike a lot of financial scandals, although this is very small, it's very easy to understand. Everyone can understand it. I would only say one thing. I mean, yes, I think he should have suspended Craig Williams, given that Craig Williams himself said that it was a massive error of judgment. The only thing, and I'm not trying to be funny about this, but if Craig Williams actually knew that the election was going ahead when it was, why would he place a bet of only £100?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just putting it there. It doesn't quite make sense to me.
Well, the argument is you get, I mean, who knows why, but there's an issue. The more we put on, the greater scrutiny there is. There's a question of...
No, I agree. But the point is, it's just completely crazy if you think about it. I mean, why would you risk your entire career for a stake of £100? And as I said, I just wonder whether it meant that he didn't know it, but he highly suspected it.
Yeah.
And of course, if he highly suspected it, that would not, as I understand it, be an offence. It would be an offence if he actually knew it.
Yeah. And I think it's very hard, in fact, to prosecute these things very often, because the distinction between very strongly suspecting and actually knowing where there's a paper trail may be a very thin line indeed. Joan Bakewell, how damaging do you think this scandal is? And do you think Rishi Sunak can do anything to stop it? Because we're going to have cabinet ministers on this programme every day, and we're going to say, did you have a bet? What do you think should happen? And it's yet another thing they've got to deal with when they've got so many other things on their plate as well.
Yes, I think they should clear it up very quickly. I'm completely bewildered by it because, of course, I'm not a gambling person myself, so I absolutely don't understand. But what amazes me is that they take a risk of damaging their career for £100 gamble. I mean, if they're going to risk their career, why don't they do it in their thousands?
Well, I think the thing is that they don't regard the rules as applying to them is one of the criticisms about them, that is not as conscious as that, perhaps, Joan.
Well, the world of politics is full of people who don't think they'll get caught. So they feel that flouting the laws won't apply to them. So they do take a gamble, or taking a gamble. And it just shows the lack of moral fortitude in public life.
Well, we'll get on to that, I think, throughout the rest of our discussion. Dominic, we're trying to work out where this sits in the pantheon of stories of this election. If I were to, I'm going to ask Joan the same question, actually, in a moment as well. If I say, what's the one thing, the dominant story of this election, the one thing you think of first when you think of this election, what is it? What's the thing that you think is set the tone of this election, the first thing you think of, the story-wise?
Well, I suspect the fact that Rishi Sunak returned from D-Day after the British celebrations and didn't stay for the international leg of it is probably the most damaging thing that's happened, at least within the election. I think this gambling thing is much less so, in my opinion, and I suspect it will stay less in the memory. But of course, it's a slightly different feature. But I mean, what this election has become about too much, I think, is about the process. That's to say, how big the majority be? Will it be a so-called supermajority, which is a nonsensical term anyway, and not about the actual policies? And what is depressing to me is how little of the attention, including by the media, I have to say, has been about the different policies of the parties.
Is that because they don't have that many different policies, I wonder, actually, Dominic? Because when you look at things like the fiscal rules, things like the approach to the health service, things like the approach even to areas which should be more divisive, like net zero, they're not actually that different. We have I'm not sure that's the fault of the media. That seems to be the way that Labour are conducting this election.
I think Labour have a very ambitious plans for abandoning certain trade union laws brought in by the Conservatives, saying they will rule out what they call exploitative zero-hour contracts, so they never define what it means. When they talk about growth, these are, in my opinion, policies which will damage the startup growth, the seed corn of the economy. And this is not being discussed. And I think it will become very much a talking point after, as we all suspect, Labour are elected.
Joan, what's the story that lingers in your mind of this election thus far?
What I think matters most is the nature of change, and the time is ripe. And I think there's a sense that whatever the different parties propose, there's a sense that change is due, that the pendulum is swinging, and these kind of historical inevitabilities stand free of various proposed policies. I think the policies are interesting. I think there's some to be said on both sides of the manifestos. But I do think that the nature of historical change is underway, and we shall see change.
Yeah, and in that sense, because, and this is to Dominic's point as well, the process is such, the polls are such, we know this change is coming. That becomes the overwhelming feeling, irrespective of what individual policies are.
I think that's very much the case. And I think it's very hard for the parties to get people to examine the differences in their policies, because they're all huddling around the middle ground in order to cull the floating voters. And in a sense, the game's up. Change is inevitable. It's coming. It's part of the historical pendulum that swings. And so making minor adjustments to pieces of policy is playing at the edges.
I just want to ask the two of you one question, if I may, because the thing that a lot of people have got in touch with this morning, they are quite exercised by the betting scandal. Some people are saying, hang on a second, you have to go through the process, innocent until proven guilty, etc., etc. And other people saying it goes to the very heart of what Andrew Neil was saying actually earlier. It goes to the heart of the one rule for us, one rule for the others, etc. Rule breaking, basically, and thinking that this doesn't really apply to us. I just want to read this text quickly from Jerry. And I'm going to take the constituency out. It's absurd, says Jerry, the voters in a constituency vote in an MP who then has to stand down within days as they have a criminal record or they're charged with something. So voters have to elect again. Candidates being investigated should not be allowed to stand. And the question to both of you is just a very simple one, really. When you go to vote on July the 4th, would you prefer to know or not know whether the person that you're voting for, whoever that might be, let's just say you're voting Conservative, if that person is implicated in this? Joan, would you want to know? I know you wouldn't be voting Conservative, but it's hypothetical.
Joan can't vote.
I'm a peer,
of
so
course.
I won't be voting at all.
Well, hypothetically then, if you were going to vote, Joan, would you want to know?
Yes, I would want to know. I would want to know as much as possible about everybody's behaviour, and I wouldn't approve. I don't think they should be involved, and I think that would strike against them. Yes, it would count against them, in my judgment.
Dominic, would you want to know?
Yes, like Joan, I actually do have a vote. I'm very lucky.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. Yes, of course. One always wants to know the most one possibly can about individual candidates. Although, of course, as you know, overwhelmingly, votes cast are cast really on grounds of political affiliation, not for the individual candidate.
Yes. Okay.